Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to Aerospace Nation. Today we're pleased to welcome Lt Gen Leah Lauderback, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance, and Cyber Effects Operations. She has a wide portfolio that includes serving as the Air Force's Chief Intelligence Officer, as well as leading the service's electromagnetic spectrum enterprise. Now, in an era of widespread modernization efforts and ever greater competition in the cyber, MSO, and information domains, her task has never been more important. So with that, what I'd like to do to kick things off today is give Leah an opportunity to share her perspective. So thanks again for being here, Leah, and over to you for your introductory remarks.
Well, thanks, General Deptula. Dave, it's nice to be here. Thank you again for having me. It's an awesome time for me to be able to have a conversation about ISR, and that is the focus I'd like to have today, but happy to have answer any other questions and have a discussion on the rest of the portfolio. It's a pretty large portfolio, I will tell you. Every day is a surprise as to what it is that I walk into at the Pentagon, but a challenge and something that I look forward to on a daily basis. So what I wanted to talk about today, just to get us started, is I saw this technique out of Lieutenant General Scotty Barrier just last week at an INSA conference, an INSA dinner. And so Scotty Barrier, director of the DIA, and he's got over 40 years in the Army. So he's seen 4 different armies. That's how he describes it. So I want to describe the 3 different air forces that I've seen and really look at it from an intelligence perspective. The first Air Force that I would say that I was part of, right? 1993, just after Desert Storm, we show an immense amount of capability from an air power perspective, and of course from a space war, right? First kind of space war that we executed. Intelligence, I would say, in that decade, from where we go from 1993 to around 2003, at the beginning of OIF, is limited, very much limited in the number of sensors, limited in the ability to actually integrate intelligence coming from various sensors, limited in the ability that you as a customer at that time, as a fighter pilot, we weren't able to necessarily share the intelligence at different security classifications because of the tight-lipped policies and sharing environment that we had at the time. So limited. Nonetheless, we talked about constructs and concepts like F2T2EA, right? In the end of that decade, we talked about effects-based targeting and things that intelligence, certainly an ISR enterprise airman, would absolutely perform and provide intelligence to those capabilities. So I grew up in that. I loved that at the unit level, at the AOC, getting my feet really dirty, my boots dirty in that sense. And then we go into OIF. I don't count 9/11 as the beginning of this yet. I count OIF as the beginning of the second Air Force that I've been in, and that's because we actually demonstrated in Iraq in OIF the ability to take down an IADS and to do that in a quick manner, right? And that, of course, using our F2T2EA constructs and other things that we did, dynamic targeting, the intelligence that was supporting those missions. That was all right. I participated in that at the AOC at the time, right? So that was all that's still that first Air Force that I joined. Shortly thereafter, of course, because that only lasted for about 3 weeks, and then we get into the longer version of Second Air Force, which of course is counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, a global counterterrorism mission. From an intelligence perspective, then I'm going to look at from 2003 to around 2018, so 15 years there. And I think I characterize this as the time when ISR comes into its own from an Air Force ISR enterprise, right? Understanding that I'm dual-hatted, as you were once dual-hatted as the HICE or the head of the IC element for the Air Force. So I have certainly part of me works and spends money from the intelligence community, but I'm an airman at heart, right? I am an ISR airman answering to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the SECAF, into CFAX, and et cetera, et cetera. And so those 15 years where we do counterinsurgency, now we get more sensors, right? You're very familiar with that. MQ-1, MQ-9, Global Hawk, and now we actually are able to really build out the integrated nature of the DCGS into a global enterprise. Stovepipes start to come down from a multi-intelligence perspective. Stovepipes start to break down, or policy starts to come away, so that we can share intelligence better. And so I see this, the coming of our age, right, for the Air Force ISR enterprise during those years. And now, fast forward to 2018, this is the third Air Force that I've been part of. A pivot now to the new National Defense Strategy, 2018. You could extend that to 2022. It actually happened to be in 2018 as well that General Jameson in the Mitchell Institute actually unveiled the Next Gen Air Force ISR Next Gen Flight Plan, excuse me. And so that was the beginning of this vision of the Third Air Force, or from an intel perspective, I think. And I'm very privileged to be part of that. And I'll talk to you a little bit about our ISR vision and where we're going from there. But the ability here now to, take Title 50 capabilities, Title 10 capabilities, bring those all together. Data, the amount of data that we're working with now, and the amount of data that we'll be working with by the end of the decade, infinite numbers. Increased in order of how much data we've got. So now we've got a problem of data-driven, problem-centric. We've got to be able to develop our airmen, our tools, our enterprise, all of that to be able to sift through all of this data to be able to provide commanders, whether that's CFAX or the combatant commanders, or if it's just senior leaders with intelligence to make good decisions. So I'm happy and privileged that I've been part of this for the last 30 years, and really privileged to be in a position that I get to influence and lead that, set that vision for the enterprise, and then allow others to continue going forward in the future. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much for those remarks. Actually, that's a wonderful segue to kind of my first question. I wanted to let's dig into a little bit more detail on what you had to say. We heard a bit about your strategic vision for Air Force ISR at the latest AFA Warfare Symposium in March. Mm-hmm. And I think you hit the nail on the head that it's all about providing decision advantage to the force. So my question is, do you believe that we're an inflection point in the Air Force ISR given the ever-growing complexity of our threats? And if so, what are some of your thoughts on how the Air Force is going to achieve that decision advantage, particularly in the context of the ISR enterprise?
Sure. Yeah. So the inflection point to me, if there was an inflection point, I thought that would have been in 2018 with the rewriting of the National Defense Strategy. But I go back to thinking that there are challenges in every single one of our decades, every single one of our dynamic environments that we're working in. So to me, this is just another It's just another challenge that we've got to overcome. Similarly, during our counterinsurgency and counterterrorism days, where we had to come up with a new sensor to do counter IED types of missions, right? And what do? We come up with we have great innovative airmen, an innovative joint force that is able to make that happen. So I think that we'll be very successful in doing this. But our way of doing this, from my perspective, is first we've got to develop this vision. It's a refresh, really, of the vision that the Next Gen Flight Plan that General Jameson and the senior leaders had signed out in 2018. This one is now connected to the Air Force Future Operating Concept, right, which General Brown just signed out, I think, maybe 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago now. And so we wanted to attach to that Air Force Future Operating Concept. There are 6 fights within that Future Operating Concept. Intelligence is necessary for every single one of those future fights, right? To get into theater, to sustain, to be able to fly in theater, all those things, intelligence is absolutely necessary. And what I would say is the vision that we have and we're still writing this, and we're still in draft, and I wish that I could say today that we're right, that I'm going to publish it tomorrow, but
we'll have you back for when it's published.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, sir. But absolutely, it really nests and focuses on the sensing sensing grid. And I talked a little bit about this at AFA as well. The sensing grid is what it is a thing, and a thing today that that does exist. We just do it on a smaller basis, not at the scale that we know that we need, not at the speed we know that we need. But we've got 4 things that are associated with that sensing grid. The first one is the sensors. You've got to have the sensors, and happy to talk about some of the modernization of those sensors here in a bit. But let me just say that the sensors that exist today, it's not just from the airborne layer. It's also from the spaceborne layer. It could be from what it is that the Navy is providing, or what it is that the Army might be providing. All of that needs to be considered a sensor. I would even argue that we used to call it, and we still do. I wish we would kind of get away from this name, but non-traditional ISR, where an F-16, right, might be able to use its Lantern pod and provide some non-traditional ISR. Well, that to me, with the capabilities that we have and we're building and executing today with the F-35 as an example, or the B-21 in the future, whatever it might be, we need to be able to get the information off of that. And if it's good for intelligence, then we'll turn that into intelligence. If it's just good for battle space awareness, then right, we can use that for battle space awareness or for targeting, whatever it might be. But I see those sensors as not just what we provide from an airborne layer. The second thing would be the infrastructure or the integration of all of that data. And this is what we would call the digital infrastructure, ISR digital infrastructure. A few years ago, we had thought about this, and we've just, and as a matter of fact, it was in that next gen flight plan, but we were unable to really ever get the resources, the funding to start to architect that out. I am happy to say that we've got some money to do that now, and we will be moving out on that very shortly. I'm also happy to say that Secretary Kendall's operational imperatives, one of his operational imperatives that has to do with ABMS, is also paired very closely or partnered very closely with us to help us to develop that digital infrastructure, because we've got to be able to bring all of that data together at multiple security levels, right? So this is not just about getting intelligence from at the SCI level. We need to be able to bring it from commercial as well, right, as one of those sensors, to bring it into perhaps a secret level, as well then to be able to use any Title 50 types of capabilities. So that's our digital infrastructure that we're gonna build out. Third would be the orchestration, and I call orchestration as really like intelligence C2, right? I mean, somebody does need to do the command and control of all of the sensors out there, and so the intelligence community, a number of us have globbed onto the word orchestration. In my mind, it's just pretty simple. And maybe I'm missing out on what it truly means, but I just want to be able to have all of those sensors, the right phenomenology, looking at the right targets at the right time, right? So that's the orchestration. And then the final thing, excuse me, because I'm brain farting. Sense making, right? How could I forget about the human element of this? And so the sense making, honestly, this might be even the most important part of the sensing grid. Knowing that we are going to have, I talked about that lack of data that we had in the very beginning of my first Air Force, and now we're moving into a place where we've got so much data, we can't sift through all of it. And it will be only ever increasing through the end of this decade with the sensors that will go up. So that sense making needs to have the tools, right? The AAA tools, we talk about augmentation, artificial intelligence, and assistance, or augmentation. I think I said those right: automation, augmentation, and artificial intelligence. So the AAA tools that we can arm our airmen with then to be able to sift through all of that data. And the DCGS just a few years ago, they already started to modernize in this area, right? And so we just want to double down on that. This is a matter of, I had talked about data-driven but problem-centric. So as opposed to watching a Predator feed or YouTube, right? I was a DCGS mock, a mission operations commander at one point, and I remember, being on the headset and talking to the U2 pilot about the things that we were going to collect on. But now we're, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and can we solve that in a predictive manner? Those problems come from the CFAC. or they come from perhaps the J2 at the combatant command, right? So they're answering questions for the decision makers, no doubt. And so that we need to continue to develop out that that force of ISR airmen in the DCGSs. And then the last thing that I'll say about that sensing grid is that it's the tools, it's the airmen, but from an organizational perspective, it's also the targeting capabilities that we have, the targeting organization, right? The wing or the group or the squadrons that support targeting, and then bringing in the AOC as well. So those things, and I think you would, if you had, I know you did have the COMAC here, and I don't know if you talked about the nexus of bringing those three things together from an intelligence or an ISR perspective to be able to get decision advantage, to be able to get intelligence to whomever needs to be making that, the battle manager needs to make the decision, or whomever it needs to be. And so I'm excited about that vision. So we're going to set that vision. I think that there are elements that that organizations out there are already doing. The MAGCOMs are already working on these areas. And then once we, slap the table, sign the vision out, and then we'll have resources, advocacy. We'll have things to stand on and link to that hopefully in future POMs we'll be able to continue with the resourcing for that. So.
Well, thanks for that. That's a very good overview, and I think orchestration is a perfect word for what it is that you're trying to do in bringing all of those elements together. And I'm struck by a phrase I coined, I guess, 15 years ago now, that we're swimming in sensors. We need to avoid drowning in data. And that has certainly come to fruition. And what you've described is how to deal with that situation. Because if that was the case in 2006, 7, 8, 9, it's grown exponentially since then. So a little bit of a segue to one of the areas that you talked about, and we were chatting beforehand that now JADC2 is going to be known as CJADC2, with the C being Combined and Joint All-Domain Command and Control. But clearly that's an incredibly important endeavor, and you and your staff have a big hand in developing that concept. So can you share with the audience a little bit on how you plan on actualizing or talking about the importance of actualizing this concept rapidly, and that this whole notion of all-domain command and control, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance is just not like treating acquisition of another piece of hardware. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah, correct. Yes. So, I think it's important to understand JADC2 or CJADC2 at this point. This is a concept, and it needs a CONOPS. And I think that the Joint Staff is working in that direction. The Air Force's contribution to JADC2 certainly is ABMS. And my concentration is how do I get intelligence to ABMS, right, to be able to make those make decisions. There certainly is a SIX perspective to this as well, and we talked a little bit about that before, as far as what are the communications paths to ensure that JADC2 would be successful in the future. And so we certainly have a role there. But I couldn't tell you anything too much more than, yes, the concept absolutely needs to happen. There is a lot of conversation in the Pentagon about it, and I think that there's good movement. Conversation doesn't always mean movement in the right direction, but I think in this case we can say that there is movement in the right direction for sure. And the Air Force, I know, is going to continue to move out on ABMS, and from our perspective, we will continue to move out on that digital infrastructure, ISR digital infrastructure, to ensure that we get the intelligence to the right folks. So that's really my contribution to it.
Very good. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are paying attention to some of the big name retirements that are coming up in the ISR world over the next several years. Things like E3 AWACS, J-STARS, the E8, the U2, RQ4, Global Hawk. Could you walk us through what the Department of the Air Force approach is going to be to replacing some of these capabilities? Because as most in our audience understand, it's not necessarily going to be another airborne platform. So
Yes.
a couple of your thoughts in
Yes,
that regard.
absolutely. I would say that it's not a. I'm glad that you used the term capabilities as opposed to a platform, a swap for a platform. Certainly, there are capabilities that we really we need to ensure that we have the ability to use when it is that we need to use those. And so, I think the big change here is one, the stand up of the Space Force. And so that the space-based layer, which does not, in Leah's mind, does not necessarily equate to the intelligence community owning that. That, just as we have an airborne layer that is dedicated to Department of Defense, purchased or owned and operated by Department of Defense, I think the same can be said for a space-based layer. We're in these conversations right now. The departments, both DNI and the DoD are, and so we'll see what comes out of that. But the either way, we're going to have incredible amounts of sensors that are coming that are space-based, and thus have a certain amount of resiliency, more resiliency or more survivability, certainly, than some of the airborne capabilities that you had mentioned. So I see that there's goodness there, and I think that we just need to start to TTX what it is that the constellation, that entire enterprise might look like in a 2027, 2028 time frame. And then I think that we can get to a point where folks are understanding that there will be an exponential amount of data that is coming, and more persistence. I will use my time at OIR as the J2 out there in Operation Inherent Resolve. And what we had an issue with, not an issue with JSTARS, but an issue with persistence, right? We didn't have persistence to be able to chase ISIS around. The things that we had persistence with were, MQ-9s. Global Hawks would help us for sure, but we didn't. In a permissive environment like that, you can have that persistence. That persistence is very satisfying as a targeteer, right? Somebody that wants to be able to track, in this case, the ISIS going from one, maneuvering from one place to the next. We need to do that for peer competitors as well, for when we, when or if we go into conflict. Actually, I would say it's before conflict even, right? We need to, there's a lot of data that you can get from GMTI, and if you have that persistence to start to understand somebody's pattern of life. And where do they go after garrison? They go to their normal launch sites, these 16 launch sites, whatever it might be. I think that GMTI can help us to understand and characterize the battle space well before any conflict starts. And so I look forward to that endeavor. So when folks are looking at, and I think that the Air Force has had a difficulty messaging this with here's the divestiture of a number of these ISR platforms, but the truth is that they were backed up by a number of studies over the last number of years that this is the right thing to do in order to get ready for a peer competitor and a potential be ready for a peer fight, is that you need survivable capabilities. And so there are some that we can't even talk about, right? We won't talk about in a venue such as this, but other airborne capabilities that we'll have from a penetrating standpoint that I think will also be, certainly will also be part of that enterprise as we go forward. So we haven't had a great message, but I think it's a good message, and we're starting to message that a little bit more as we get closer to the times of these of the divestiture of some of these aircraft.
Okay, well, as we move to new moving target indicator solutions, both GMTI and AMTI, the program management of systems like E7 and the space-based MTI sensors need to be highly integrated. But our systems, unfortunately, our industrial base doesn't build them that way. In an integrated fashion. So that kind of poses some significant challenges. What are your thoughts on how to achieve better integration to avoid some of the historical problems we have with stovepipe systems?
Sure. I guess two things. And one, if I was the acquisition officer here, I would tell you that, hey, we're trying to answer that. We're trying to ensure that we've got integrated capabilities every day, right? And those in the PEOs. as they build out these capabilities. As the intelligence officer, I will tell you again, I'll go back to the digital infrastructure, and I think that in commercial entities they would say the same, is that there's never going to be a network that is going to, or a solution to labeling everything the same in every way, especially for the Department of Defense, the intelligence community. So we've got to have a way of translating that data that does get that comes off of systems or needs to go to systems through those various networks. And so that is how we would build out an ISR digital infrastructure. And I think the same is to be said for ABMS. And if that's through the use of APIs or other translating tools, types of things. But that's what we've got to get to, because otherwise I just think it's probably it's too difficult of a challenge to ensure that every system out there is devoted to this type of language. Yeah, I mean, I think that we've shown that over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've talked about it, alluded to it. We live in a world of rapidly advancing threats, particularly China. And to meet these, you've already spoken very well about capability, but we also need capacity. But the Air Force here is planning on divesting another 1,000 aircraft in the next 5 years. So how's the Air Force going to ensure it can execute the full range of combatant command missions given these cuts?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that I would take this as a question about ISR more so than the numbers of aircraft. I mean, I wouldn't. It's not truly in my portfolio to be able to talk to all of that. But I would say that we're not divesting in ISR. We're not divesting in the mission. I actually looked this up before coming over here in the last couple of days. That intelligence is certainly a core warfighting function. It is one of 7 warfighting functions. But for the the Air Force, since 1948, it has been a core mission of the Air Force until about early 2000s, when we started to use the term intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and then that became a core mission. And then in 2013, just recoined as a core function that General Brown is using just a few months ago. So we're certainly not divesting in that core function that the Air Force provides for itself or for the joint warfighter. So ISR is something that we're going to continue to invest in and execute on a daily basis. So if you go across this full range of, and the question is about full range of capabilities, it's not just about ISR. It's about let me use something else that's in my portfolio, is electronic warfare or electromagnetic spectrum operations. And I'm happy to say that Secretary Kendall, when he started his operational imperatives, he noted that after the end of that first season of the operational imperatives, he noted that hey, I probably need to have somebody concentrating on electronic warfare. And so we developed a team. That team works out of my office just this last summer, and it's called the I won't bore you with the name, but bottom line, cross-cutting organization that it talks about what are the requirements, right? What are the gaps? What is it that we need to be able to target? What kill chains out there that exist that we need to be able to degrade or deny or take down? And so they have done a marvelous amount of work in the last 9-ish months, 8 months, and have outbriefed the Secretary just in the last week. And so as we go through this POM cycle, for FY25, we're looking to, we hear some things that Mr. Secretary, we think that we can invest in, and so we're going to have those conversations over the next couple of months. Even if we haven't, even if we don't get it across the line for FY25, there are going to be things that we stood up. For example, the wing, the spectrum warfare wing, just about a year and a half ago. Right, we're making progress in this area. We're trying trying to, from a human capital perspective or talent management perspective, is understand who are these folks that live in this space, that have grown up in this space of electronic attack, electronic protection, electronic support, and how do we get them into the right leadership position so that we know that this is a domain that we absolutely have to dominate in, and we don't think that we can cede that to other services any longer at this point. So I think that's all that I would say about it, because I need to give the Secretary decision space, certainly, as to where it is that he wants to go with it. But we're doing the analysis right now.
Yeah, let me ask you a tangential question. During Desert Storm, we only employed about 5-6% of the weapons employed were precision guided. And if you look at Operation Inherent Resolve, which you were involved in, about 98% of all the weapons expended were precision guided. Yet, this is a capacity question. We had 3 times the number of targeteers in the Desert Storm era than we have today, but yet the numbers of weapons that demand precision targeting have just exploded beyond exponentially. How are you dealing with the quantity issue with respect to targeteers?
Yes. Okay. So I remember way back in those early years of having to get out the big orange binders. Do you remember the JMIN binders? I mean, when you actually had to do weaponeering, and it was get out the calculator, go through these big books. Obviously, at some point we went through to software to enable us to go through that in a much faster manner. I mean, those are just tools that. And certainly, point mensuration capabilities that support those some of those precision munitions today, getting much faster. Right? I mean, we're just using technology.
Is this an area where artificial intelligence will play a greater role as we move into the future?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. One of the things that we have to I hear about. I hear a lot about automation and AI, and where we can take potential that we could take cuts in various capabilities, intelligence being one of those. And I just I think we have to be very careful about what it is that we think that the computer can do for us, the system can do for us, because we are in a warfighting business, right? We're in a profession of arms where people die, and so we need to ensure that we've met whatever the ROE is. We've got the positive identification. We've got a high enough confidence level. We've done collateral damage estimates. I mean, these are things that a lot of times I feel like we rush to we've got to have in-flight target updates to weapons, right? And we've got to be able to do this all in an automated fashion. And part of me just wants to step back and think about there is ROE, there is policy, there is, right, and those are the things that drive us to sometimes, right, the collateral damage estimates, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to find a balance there, or perhaps the tools, right, those automated tools or artificial intelligence helps us so that we can have our airmen looking at the things that are much more important.
Right.
And maybe that is looking at more in depth as to the confidence level that we have as sensors find targets. Do we have a high confidence in those, or medium confidence in those? And right.
Yeah, I'm reminded of in this discussion. I was thinking back to Operation Unified Protect, the operations in over Libya, and the USAF commander at the time saying that if there was not the ability to reach back to the Air Force Targeting Center at that time, they would not have had sufficient numbers of targeteers to accomplish the mission. So I guess my point is, capacity matters not just in terms of numbers of airplanes, but also in the personnel necessary to accomplish these missions.
Yes.
But speaking of that sort of time frame, could you share with the audience a bit on your experiences in Inherent Resolve when it came to dynamic targeting and where we are in that particular venue today?
Okay, sure. So, I mean, from my time at OIR, I would say, there was still a mix of deliberate targeting and dynamic targeting. because of the way that the battle space and Operation Inherent Resolve was split up, if you will, right? So JITF, right, the special ops folks working over in this area, the CFLIC working over in this area, the CFAC doing, overlooking, trying to develop targets where it is that we were trying to develop targets. I remember the first commander that I was there, right? We went through two commanders because of the time difference there, but a high rate of fire. That's what he wanted, was a high rate of fire on ISIS at the time. And so we tried to produce as many as we could, but it was a blend of deliberate targeting and dynamic targeting. On the dynamic targeting side of the house, where I felt like we had the best success is when we actually had the persistent ISR, and that was proven through SJTF operations. The ability to maintain 2 or 3 or however many MQ-9s, overlay that then with perhaps a J-stars, or overlay it with a different phenomenology so that you could get various multi-intel or ISR phenomenologies on it. Include SIGINT, right? I mean, there was quite a bit of SIGINT queuing that we were able to use, and then put an MQ-9 on it to FMV or whatever, get the PID, and then be able to target something. So I see that as, and some of my most frustrating days when in OIR was trying to identify dynamic targets without that persistence. It was just incredibly difficult to not be able to maintain custody, but the commander still wanting a high rate of fire, right? And so you have to take risks in those cases, or find different techniques. But like I said, I mean, I would just hammer home on that persistence. It was invaluable for dynamic targeting, for the mobile targets and the mobile nature that ISIS was presenting us, of course. But you can continue that. That'll be in the future, any future fight that we have. That every nation out there understands how difficult it is to target mobile targets, and so they'll continue to invest in those capabilities.
And I'm thinking about the change in the operating environment between OIR, where we had a completely permissive air environment, to one over the South China Sea, or in Eastern Europe, where the airspace is going to be extraordinarily contested. So perhaps that persistent ISR layer moving from air to space, which then reiterates the importance of being able to protect that too. But we'll save that discussion for another day.
Okay.
In probably at another classification level. But speaking of China, they're rapidly expanding and modernizing their spectrum dominance capabilities. And part of that is their doctrine of what they call system destruction warfare, which is specifically targeting our information networks, command and control architectures, and kill chains. So how does your ISR vision address countering this over the long term?
So I would say that the ISR vision doesn't necessarily address China countering our networks. In my other hat, right, in my sixth hat, certainly working with SAFCN, the CIO, as well as our other service brethren, and the OSD CIO. We understand that we've got to shore up from a cyber defense perspective, a cybersecurity perspective. And there's a number of initiatives and things that are happening in that space. Our vision, though, the ISR vision, to get to that question, is maybe won't address it directly, but let me address using information warfare. Okay, so my directorate, or my DCS there at the Pentagon, we have taken on the lead role for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force for information warfare, and ACC being really the lead command, but not the only MAGCOM, of course, that is going to be operating in this space. But I see information warfare as the ability to protect and defend our own capabilities, whatever those might be. If that's the understanding of what we're going to unveil next, or if it's a capability that we have today to be able to protect and defend those, and then to influence and attack on the red side of the and that doesn't mean China, right? It just means on the adversary side, what it is that we can do for a deterrence or influence or misperception, right? Having somebody understand that we're maybe taller than we are, or they think that right, they don't have the ability to get into these types of whatever, if it's networks or if it's capabilities that we might have. So I think that there's a way for information warfare to help out in this space. And again, there's a lot of conversation that's happening at the Pentagon, a number of initiatives that are happening at a variety of levels, not just within the Air Force, certainly within the combatant commands, but also at the OSD level of where are we going from a some folks like to call it perception management or MISO operations, but I'll just, couple all of that in these operations that are in the information space. We know that we've got to get better at that. Can I just say a couple more things?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would be a matter of from my perspective and what I am, I'm not getting into the operational perspectives, right? The 3 does operations, and the 3 in this case is, might be running some operations, or the 3 is the MAGCOMs are doing that for the combatant command. My job here is to try to institutionalize information warfare. We've been talking about it for decades, and even before I came in, I know it, right? Because when I was a young second lieutenant at the AOC, we had an information operations flight, and it hasn't matured too much more until we now have an information operations career field. We're robusting that career field. That career field is actually functionally managed by the 3, which I think is the right thing to do. But it's making the airmen, right? It's training the airmen. It's building out the organizational construct. Those institutional things that we've got to do. Let operations continue, because those are happening today, but let's build out the foundation of where it is that we need to go with information warfare.
Well, I'm really happy to hear you elaborate on information warfare. Just real quick, one of the areas that for decades now has been frustrating to me is when you look at the security pillars of our nation, and we use the DIME acronym, yes. Okay? Diplomacy, information, military, economics. We have cabinet level agencies for 3 out of the 4. The one we don't have a cabinet level agency for is information. You're doing the best that you can inside the Air Force, but this nation has to deal with information at a much higher institutional element, and again, that's another topic. But one of the things before we move to questions from the audience that I wanted to ask you about, and you already mentioned it, and it's really positive to see the recent increase in attention that the Air Force and yourself are placing on electronic warfare. It's really a multi-domain enterprise, especially the cyber and space portion of the mix. So how are these domains being integrated into the Air Force's approach to exploiting electronic warfare as an integral part of our approach, if you will?
Mm-hmm. So I could
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
can you expand?
Yeah, I can. Well, probably very little, because again, I'm trying to. I don't want to get out in front of the Secretary or the Chief of Staff, but the analysis that this team has done over the last 8 or 9 months, it's invaluable. It needs to continue, and so we'll continue in this next season 2, if you will, of this area. I can say though, the EC-37 is the aircraft, and we can thank Congress for helping us out. I think to give us another, I believe it's 6. I couldn't, don't quote me on that number, but I think that there is an understanding all across the Department of Defense and on the Hill that this is an area that we need more investment in. So we'll thank Congress for enabling us to do that.
Okay, well, very good. Thanks for the insights. Those were excellent. And now what we're going to do is open the session to questions from the audience. You all know the drill by now out there. What I'll do is call on you, and then please, if you raise your hand, go ahead and unmute your mic, and please state your name and affiliation before asking the question. Or we've got plenty of questions right here using the Q&A function. So with that, let me kick it off with one of our crack reporters from Air Force Magazine, Greg Hadley. There's been concern about gaps in ISR between the retirement of aging aircraft and the fielding of new capabilities, either aircraft or from space. Do you see potential gaps, and what can the Air Force do to reduce or even eliminate those gaps?
Yes, so it's not something that the Air Force is going to do by ourselves by any means. This is a team sport. And that team includes the intelligence community. We continue to have questions or conversations with the intelligence community, primarily with the NRO, but also the CSAs, right, the combat support agencies, who are the functional managers for those capabilities. So it's again a team sport. We won't be answering it all by ourselves, but I would say that if there's we're going to try to minimize gaps as much as possible. Right, we all understand that that we need to. Right, we're working in competition right now, and that we've got to be prepared for conflict. And none of us wants to have a gap, and so we're going to address that as best as we can. But again, through not just the Air Force, but through Space Force as well as the intelligence community to shore up any of those gaps.
Very good. We have one raised hand here from Frank Wolf. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, okay, great. General, I just wanted to ask a little bit on the persistent, you had mentioned again, sort of the persistent ISR issue in terms of, and also in terms of possibly taking advantage of other service assets as well. And I guess the Army has been experimenting with this Zephyr UAS, which is an Airbus drone that I guess flew for like 64 straight days over Yuma, I think. And I just wondered because I think General Kurilla at CENTCOM has sort of said that CENTCOM wants to increase ISR of Afghanistan sort of over the horizon, targeting, et cetera, investing in long duration, high altitude alternative ISR can go up for days or weeks. Because he said right now he's spending 8% of his time just transiting to the region to be able to collect, ISR. So I wondered, do you know if the Air Force is thinking about the Zephyr drone, or I just want to get some of your ideas. I believe AFRL might have an experiment coming up with an experimental aircraft for sort of this long duration, high altitude ISR. So I just wanted to check with you on that.
Yeah.
Sort of longer loiter time to complement the MQ-9s.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. And unfortunately, I'll probably have to punt on most of that. And if I could get back to you, I absolutely would. I just know that we've had conversations. And I don't know how much, if it's AFRL or who in the Air Force is helping us to partner with the Army, or is there another answer that helps out for CENTCOM? I do know the conversations are happening. You know how I also know that we're partnering with the Army and Project Convergence, so there are these conversations and the partnering that's happening, but I could not explain it to the specific question that you have in the matter of CENTCOM operations. So apologize for that.
That's okay. Thanks, Noe.
Here's one from Michael Merrow. Are you expecting space-based GMTI capabilities to be available to combatant commanders in the 27-28 timeframe that you discussed? And if so, when might space-based AMTI follow?
Okay, so I think that those types of answers I cannot provide in a venue such as this. I apologize that I won't be able to do it, but I am hopeful, and hope is not a good thing to hang out your hat on most times. But I am encouraged, I will say, by the conversations, the partnership that we're having with between the Space Force and the intelligence community to get to a place where we do have that near persistence or those types of capabilities. So I think that's about all that I could say in this venue. Thanks.
Okay, here's one from, and I'm doing my best to pronounce your name correctly, but Apurva Manchinkar of Inside Defense. Number one, what are the prospects for tactical space-based ISR, and what are the challenges to achieving that? And then number two, separate and distinct, what lessons, insights are you seeing out of the Ukrainian conflict, and how might those be applied to Air Force operations?
Okay, so I would say on the first question that you have there about tactical space-based ISR, I would actually tell you that any space-based ISR, whether it's owned by an intelligence agency today, or if it is a DoD entity, you can use those things in tactical environments. It's just a matter of how, the scale that you can do, right? How long it is that you can use those in a tactical sense. So we certainly have experience using those in a tactical sense today, and there nothing that stops us from doing that in the future. I would also say that I'm encouraged by, all of the examples that we have of airborne ISR being able to task that tactically, to task that from, if that's the CFAC or whomever needs that information. We've got a lot of examples of that. And so we ought to be able to use those methodologies and extend that into space-based capabilities that, whether, again, they're owned and operated by the intelligence community or by a DoD entity. You had mentioned, or you asked a question about lessons learned out of Russia, Ukraine, specific to. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what the question was there, Dave.
What lessons or insights are you drawing out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict,
Okay.
and are any of them applicable to Air Force operations?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so thanks for that question. Maybe not from a tactical ISR perspective, but I would tell you that there are the commercial entities that are being used by the Ukrainians are things that we've used in the past. The Department of Defense certainly has had contracts and works with commercial entities for our intelligence collection or battle space awareness types of collection. But now, I think it's all energized. There's a lot of energy that's going into it and a lot of effort, and we see that the more capacity that commercial entities provide us, perhaps that's more that we can capitalize on from an operational perspective. So we're definitely looking forward to that. The other item that I would talk about from a Russia-Ukraine aspect is that our airmen are supporting EUCOM and its mission to understand, characterize the battle space. And we're, I had mentioned during those the first Air Force, the second Air Force. During the first Air Force, where we had a lot of targeteers that were doing target system analysis, breakdown of what's effect-based operations, and exercising. Boy, we exercised all the time back in the day. And then during our Air Force number 2, during all those counterinsurgency types of operations that we ran, or counterterrorism, we didn't have the opportunity to exercise as much because we were deploying all of the time, and we were working in a permissive environment that wasn't allowing us to really prepare for a high-end fight. So Russia-Ukraine has absolutely allowed our ISR airmen to prepare for that. Right? They are getting lots of reps and sets over there in the European theater, and I know that they're excited to do those things. And so they honestly, and I just was out in Korea not too long ago as well. Same thing over there, right? That never stops. That battle rhythm never stops in Korea. So these are the two places I'd say on the earth that we're able to get some reps and sets in and capitalize on being prepared for a high-end fight. So that's what we're looking for.
Very good. Here's one from Tom Jones in International News Network. Numerous military and intelligence community leaders have said that the U.S. government's habit of overclassification of information hurts information sharing with partners. As open source intelligence is playing a larger role in many operations, much classified information is becoming less relevant. How can the Air Force move to declassify intelligence faster or get ahead of open source intelligence and better help the U.S. frame operations in the public mind?
Okay, good question. Let me take a give you an example out of my Space Force days. So I was the Space Force S2, and then prior to being that the Director of Intelligence for the Space Force, I was actually the Director of Intelligence for U.S. Space Command. And absolutely, we needed to have a message. We needed a message to the American public that that the threat was real, that there was a warfighting domain that China uses and thinks of space as a warfighting domain, and so we needed to be able to explain that to the American public as well. And so we had, and we worked with the intelligence community to ensure that what are the things that we can say and we can educate and inform. And so there are a lot of talking points that you all have already heard that have come out of either the Space Force or out of U.S. Space Command. And so so the process is there for sure as to how it is that we can share more information with the American public. From a partner perspective, holy cow, we still need to do a lot better at this. Nobody would, I mean, we would all agree to that. That we all know that we're not going to be fighting any fight without our allies and partners, and so we're chipping away at it. I would say from an intelligence community perspective, I shouldn't speak for the intel community, but I do think that we've got we're constantly bringing this up, and we're constantly having the conversations as to how do we chip away at that policy, and a lot of this is held up in, if you will, original classification authorities, OCAs. And so I, as the senior intelligence officer for the Air Force, yes, I am an original classification authority for the things that I collect on, right, or that I have the authority to classify. But within the other, right, all the other OCAs out there, they have that ability as well. I would also, lastly, I guess I would say that I think we're moving in the right direction. We all want to get there faster, but we're certainly moving in the right direction to be able to share more intelligence, share more information. PAI and CAI are certainly a way for us to do that, and I think that we're all of the services are working toward that goal. Again, it was so frustrating as the OIRJ too I certainly had my Five Eye partners that were right next to me, but still unable to share as much as I wanted to, and then for the greater coalition, unable to share for the greater coalition to the amount or to the depth that was necessary. So we've all worked in that space, and we know that we got to get better at it. Thanks.
Very good. Here's one from Brian Everstein from Aviation Week, and it's on a subject that you and I were chatting about before we kick this off. With the Air Force and the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, collaborating on future space-based MTI capabilities, how can the Air Force ensure that these multi-role sensors will provide both real-time dynamic tactical warfighting targeting along with support for the intelligence community? How much give and take will this development require?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So those conversations are happening right now, and they've been happening for a number of months. And it's not really on the Air Force side. If you consider the Department of the Air Force, then it's the Space Force that is leading these conversations for the Department of the Air Force. And there is a way to do this. There is no doubt about it. We all agree that there's a way. If it's through allocation, if it's through as constellations or satellites come over a certain region of the world, that combatant command, right, is able to task that or has control of that. I mean, the Joint Staff today leads these types of methodologies for airborne ISR and others, and so we absolutely have examples of how it is that we can do this. We just need to continue those conversations and make sure that we're doing it. Again, it's a team sport, and we've got to do this together. That's what I would say on that. It's not a finished conversation yet, so I can't tell you where it is where we are in the movie exactly, but we'll get to an answer, I'm certain, at some point.
Very good, and I'm going to give the last question to Aidan Poling. Can you describe how you've seen China's electronic warfare capabilities evolve for the past 5 years? Broadly speaking, what's your biggest area of concern with Chinese electromagnetic warfare capability?
Oh, yeah, the biggest concern for me is that it's a home game for them. It's an away game for us. And I could say that for many capabilities, other domains besides electronic warfare domain or the electromagnetic spectrum. But it's a home game. And so what does that mean is that they've got a lot of capabilities, a lot of not just capability, but capacity, right? And that's what I mean from a home game perspective for them. They've invested quite a bit in all of those types of capabilities, and that's the thing. That is absolutely the most concerning part about this. How do you penetrate that, or how do you overpower that when you're trying to play an away game?
Well, very good. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation. And thanks again to General Lauderback for being with us here today. Really appreciate the insights. And from all of us here at Mitchell Institute, all of you in the audience, and Air Force ISR C2 Enterprise, we wish you all a great aerospace-powered kind of day.